We're discussing the role of Amber Alerts and the evolution of this emergency child abduction alert system here on the morning show. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Glad you could join us. According to Amber Alert Wisconsin, on average, 13 children per day are reported missing to law enforcement throughout our state. And the State Justice Department decides whether to issue an alert based on several criteria that we'll learn about. Have you noticed an uptick in Amber Alerts? What do you think when you hear or see an Amber Alert? Do you pay attention? It's 800-642-1234. Jennifer Price-Lehman is program manager for the Amber Alert Training Program at the National Criminal Justice Training Center of Fox Valley Technical College. She was formerly commander of the Wisconsin Department of Justice Child Abduction Response Team and director of the DOJ Division of Criminal Investigation Special Operations Bureau. Jennifer, welcome back to the Ideas Network.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me back.
Good morning. Wisconsin DOJ last month said there's been a massive spike in Amber Alerts this year, going from an average of 3 a year to 11. What do you make of the rise?
That's a really hard question to answer, and there's no easy answer. Up to this point, as you know, and many of your listeners know, we have not had nearly this many Amber Alerts in this state. And while it's alarming, it's good to know that we have the Amber Alert program in Wisconsin, and we have other programs in Wisconsin that support missing and endangered children. But it's really hard to say pinpoint a specific reason or a trend that can contribute to this rise in Amber Alert activations in Wisconsin. We know that the majority of Amber Alerts across the country involve a parental abduction. Last year alone, there were 200 Amber Alerts, and 125 of them involved a family abduction. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a cause and effect relationship between domestic violence, for example, and child abductions and parental abductions specifically. Does that mean there may be instances or families where there might be an increased risk for a family abduction? It may be, but we just need to be careful not to paint a broad brush when it comes to cause and effect relationship between the occurrences and incidences of child abductions and domestic violence, for example. But we do know this: the Amber program works across the country, including in this state. It's been around for a long time, and there's a great process in place that the Wisconsin Department of Justice has implemented and really improved on. Every time there's an Amber Alert, there's an after action to really just take a look at the facts of the case, what worked, are there areas that can be improved, just to make sure that we know in this state that there's always a really effective Amber Alert program that we can use to try to find our missing children.
What I'm hearing from you is that we shouldn't be too quick to draw some causations here or inferences to what is really behind the numbers this year. It might be too early to really figure out what is going on. Can you help us understand these decisions that go into issuing an Amber Alert? What is the criteria used in Wisconsin?
Sure. The criteria in Wisconsin is very similar to the criteria in the other states in the United States. And it is this: there are 3 criteria. One is that the child is age 17 or younger. 2, there's enough descriptive information for the Amber Alert to be activated to be able to find the child and the abductor. And 3, is the child in danger of death or great bodily harm. Now, those first 2 criteria are pretty easy to meet in any missing child investigation, right? We know that it's a child, and we know what the child looks like. We don't have to have a vehicle description if there's a suspicion that the child was taken in a vehicle. We don't have to have a license plate. We don't have to have all that descriptive information. We know what the child looks like because the parent or guardian has called law enforcement and reported the child as missing. So those first two criteria are pretty easy in every Amber Alert activation request from law enforcement. Where there becomes sometimes some gray areas is that danger of death or great bodily harm, particularly in the cases of parental abductions. And so the Wisconsin Department of Justice has to evaluate every case on the merit of the case based on the information that law enforcement is providing from all of the information that they've gathered up to that point in the investigation, to be able to determine, is that child in danger of death or great bodily harm? Because what we don't want to do is issue an Amber Alert so many times that the public is sensitized to hearing that alert, and then they don't pay any attention to it.
Right, we become immune to it and don't pay attention to it. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Jennifer Price Lehman, Program Manager for the Amber Alert Training Program at the National Criminal Justice Training Center. And we're looking at the evolution of Amber Alerts, what to make of the ones that we have had this year, with your questions as well along the way. 800-642-1234. Jennifer, it felt like last month in the race to locate missing and endangered 3-year-old Major Harris in Milwaukee, that the frequency of the Amber Alerts in this case, which ended in tragedy, that they came one after another that fateful weekend. How does it work to issue multiple alerts for a single case?
Sure. So the technology that Wisconsin uses for issuing Amber Alerts is threefold. It's the emergency alert system, which is the tone you hear when you're watching TV or listening to the radio when there's an Amber Alert. And that goes off once every 30 minutes for the first 2 hours and every hour for the following 3 hours. There's the wireless emergency alert, and that's the tone that you hear on your cell phone. And that in Wisconsin is actually issued through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So Wisconsin partners with NCMEC, as it's known, to issue that wireless emergency alert. And then thirdly, Wisconsin has the Wisconsin Crime Alert Network. And if any of your listeners have ever received a crime alert, that's the third area where Wisconsin issues an Amber Alert, just to make sure that all of the areas are covered. Now, there's also secondary distribution, for example, the lottery terminals or the DOT highway signs, digital billboards, social media. Those are all areas where you'll see the Amber Alert when it's been activated, so that there's no gaps, right? The goal is to have no gaps in that dissemination, so we have the most eyes we can trying to find that child.
Going back to the wireless piece, the vast majority of Americans, 97%, now own a cell phone of some kind, and the share of us who own a smartphone is now at 85%. That's data published this year from Pew. How does the ubiquity of wireless devices in our pocket affect Amber Alerts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, most recently, the URLs for websites have been able to be added to those wireless emergency alerts. And that is even, I mean, if you think about the last time that you received an Amber Alert on your phone, what do most people want to know? They want to know, oh my gosh, what does this child look like? And you can't put a photo into a wireless emergency alert, but you can put a link to a website or to a social media site where that child's photo is there. And then you can see the photo, you can see a vehicle if there is one, you can see a suspect photo if there is one. And that allows for a much quicker response to be able to find this child. And really, that's the idea behind the Amber Alert program is to get as many people as possible to see that child's face and be able to help law enforcement find that child as quickly as possible. And really, the wireless emergency alert and the proliferation of cell phones now is really a very effective way to do that.
We're discussing Amber Alerts, the emergency child abduction alert system, with Jennifer Price Lehman, the program manager for the Amber Alert training program, part of the National Criminal Justice Training Center in Appleton. Do you work in law enforcement? What are your thoughts on Amber Alerts? Do they help? How could the system be more effective in locating a child in danger? Join in 800-642-1234. Back in a minute with Jennifer Price Lehman here on the Ideas Network. We're talking about the Amber Alert system, the emergency messages issued when a law enforcement agency determines that a child has been abducted and is in imminent danger. It is the morning show. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. According to nationwide data from the Justice Department, close to 1,100 children were rescued specifically because of an Amber Alert. That's this year's data ending in July. What questions do you have about the wireless emergency alert program we've been talking about? What have you noticed about the frequency of alerts and the information provided? Join in 800-642-1234. Jennifer Price Lehman runs the Amber Alert training program, part of the National Criminal Justice Training Center housed at Fox Valley Technical College, with us for about 9 more minutes. Jennifer, you found yourself in this line of work after a family tragedy. I'm wondering, can you share your story with us?
Absolutely. Thanks for asking. So when I was in college, I decided I wanted to be a fashion designer.
At UW-Madison.
Right, at UW-Madison. And this was 1994. And I received a call from my mom, and she told me that my cousin Chris, he was 14 at the time, was missing. So, at that point, I thought, what can I do? Because you feel helpless, right? I was in Madison at the time, and Chris had gone missing from Baraboo, not far, but still, right? There's only so much I could do. So I started disseminating posters. And my mom had called me then. I remember that day, and it was, he went missing on July 4th. And it was several days later that she called and said, stop putting up posters. Chris's body has been found. And so at that point, that was a pivotal point for me, because I felt like maybe I could do more. And so I changed my major, and from there I graduated with a degree in behavioral science and law, and a minor in criminal justice, and then moved on to law enforcement. And from there, from working in patrol, I worked then I started at the Wisconsin Department of Justice. And for my family, really the biggest questions were why, what happened? And it was about a year after Chris's body was found, another boy in Baraboo. He was 13. He went missing, and thank goodness, his name was Thad. Thad was rescued. It's a horrific story. He was taken by a young man named Joe Clark, and Joe held Thad captive in his home and broke his legs and tortured Thad. And thank goodness, Thad was able to crawl to a phone in the home when Joe was gone, and he called law enforcement, and they rescued him. Where my cousin's story comes in is during his torture, Thad recalled Joe talking about having done this to my cousin Chris earlier.
Oh my
And
God.
so at that point, Chris's case was reopened and his body was exhumed, and we learned that his legs were also broken.
Mm.
And he was he was thrown in the river with broken legs
Mm.
and left there to die. And back in 1994 and 1995, we didn't have the Amber Alert, not only in the state, but we didn't have it in this country. And, um, I often wonder if there was an Amber Alert program, might it have helped? And I can't help but think that maybe it would have. I'd like to think that it would have, but at least we were able as a family to know what happened with Chris,
You could have
and
some
also
closure. Mm.
and Joe Clark was tried and convicted and is serving a 100-year sentence in the Wisconsin state prison system, and so that gives me comfort knowing that he will never hurt another child again.
We're talking with Jennifer Price Lehman, program manager for the Amber Alert training program, which is part of the National Criminal Justice Training Center in Appleton. You can join in at 800-642-1234, your questions and stories about Amber Alerts. Fast forward to 2018, the case of Jamie Kloss, where a 13-year-old girl in Barron County abducted, later found alive. What was the impact of Amber Alerts in Jamie Kloss's situation?
Well, that became such a widely known case, but particularly in the early stages of that investigation, the Amber Alert was used to really leverage the public and all of the eyes and ears in rural Barron County. And the Amber Alert was able to touch so many people to be able to try to find her. And then what happens often, most times, when an Amber Alert is issued, particularly in a case where we have a missing child, but we have no other information to share with the public, based on the investigation at that point, that tips will start flooding in. And that's a great thing, right? Tips where, oh, I think I saw her here, or I think I saw her there. And what that does is that gives law enforcement an opportunity to find other ways to locate that child that maybe they hadn't learned of as part of the investigation. And so all of these tips that are coming in are just other leads that can contribute to the entire investigation. So I've always said no information is too little or insignificant when it comes to a missing child, and don't ever hesitate to call when when you think you might have seen a child, and particularly in the case of Jamie Kloss, there were so many tips that came in and allowed law enforcement and our child abduction and response team at the time to really saturate the area and focus our efforts to try to find her.
Today, you run the Amber Alert training program. Can you tell us about this training program and what it does?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program offers a wide variety of training. We offer virtual, live instructor-led training, on-site classroom training. We have live and recorded webinars, and we have self-paced e-learning modules that are all designed for criminal justice professionals and child protection workers, anyone who's working in the area of missing and abducted children, to be able to give them the tools and resources necessary to just enhance the programs that they already have, or give them help in creating new programs, whether it's a child abduction response team or enhancing their clearinghouse for missing and exploited children. We provide whatever training and resources that those programs need across this country. And then we also work closely with the tribes in this state and across the country in the implementation of the Ashland, Mike, Amber Alert, and Indian Country Act to make sure that the tribes and states are integrating and implementing the Amber Alert plans within Indian country, because we know that so many children across this country in Indian country go missing, and want to make sure that the state Amber Alert plans are working in conjunction with that. And then lastly, we work directly with family members of missing and abducted children and integrate their experiences and perspectives into our trainings. And that provides a trauma-informed and victim-centered approach to responding and investigating to missing children cases, so that all of our training attendees understand the impact that their work has on the families of these missing children, and that then too contributes to our ability to be able to enhance the program over time based on what we learned from the family members, what worked, what didn't work.
Jennifer, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Jennifer Price-Lehman, Program Manager for the Amber Alert Training Program. News Update is next here on the Ideas Network. You're with us for the morning show. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Now it's time for Wisconsin Life. Here's producer Maureen McCullum with a story about a very good girl.
The Mequon Nature Preserve, north of Milwaukee, is home to Wisconsin's first conservation dog, Tilia. WPR's Mary Kate McCoy recently traveled there to learn how they're harnessing Tilia's powerful sense of smell to reach their conservation goals.
That sniffing you hear is Tilia, the conservation dog at Mequon Nature Preserve. Right now, she's looking for a treat. But when she's on the job, she'll be sniffing out wild parsnip or salamanders.
There you go. Good girl.
What exactly is a conservation dog, you might ask? Tilia's main job is to detect both invasive and endangered species at the nature preserve. The staff then comes in and removes those invasive species, like the wild parsnip, and monitors for the endangered ones, like the salamanders. Corey Gritzmacher is the Director of Operations at the Nature Preserve. He says Tilia is far better at it than even the highest trained human professionals. Canines can be up to 40 times more efficient than people.
Sometimes the best trained volunteers or staff in the world won't even be able to find what, a canine can. So that's the pretty impressive part about it. And who doesn't want to go to work with a dog?
Just who's in charge is up for debate.
I often joke, it's not necessarily us getting trained. It's kind of them training us. Like, this is what you have to do if you want me to do something for you. Right? Yeah. Yes. You always have a lot to say.
Tilia is highly motivated by food, or by toys. Gritzmacher says being motivated is the key to being a good conservation dog.
Dogs in general already have 200 million olfactory sensors. We have about 5 million. So they're already set up and designed for scent detection. It's really just finding a dog that's motivated and wants to do it on a regular basis and is excited to do it, right?
4 years old now, Tilia began training as a puppy. It was slow at the start, with treats hidden in cardboard boxes. Then it got progressively more challenging until she graduated to what Gritzmacher calls pairing. That's when he places scent samples in a salt shaker. They're much more appealing with a treat sitting on top.
And eventually we'd start taking the treat away, and then if she continues to hit on the correct sample, then she gets rewarded. So that she's going to get paid again. It's kind of the same thing. We do our work, we get paid. She does her work, she gets paid.
The day I visited, Tilia's excitement was clear. With her vest on, she knew what was happening. Gritzmacher had hidden treats to mimic a search on the prairie for parsnip or salamanders.
She's got a release word. That's kind of her cue to go, we're going to go search and find something. So, and you're pretty excited to do this today, aren't you? So you got to go back down to sit. Good girl. All right. Twinkie. It's kind of a little bit of a mind game and an obstacle course for her to work through.
While Tilia's nose is the star, when it comes down to it, the success of the endeavor is as much about the rapport and relationship between the dog and the trainer. If Gritzmacher hadn't trained Tilia, he wouldn't be able to pick up on her subtle body cues, like if she gets distracted by a deer or rabbit and veers off course.
And this is the part where you start training me, right? Yeah, yeah.
Using dogs for conservation work is the same idea as police or search and rescue dogs. While Tilia was the only conservation dog in the state for several years, she now has company, and Gritzmacher only expects that number to grow.
Canines are going to start to play a huge role in the conservation field just because of their amazing detection skills, especially when resources are limited, staff is limited, and you have to search, potentially thousands of acres or miles of shoreline or whatever.
It's tough work for her. Gritzmacher says she gets worn out from a long day at work just like we do. Tilia's owner is the director of the Mequon Nature Preserve. At the end of the day, she gets to go home, be the family dog, and take some well-deserved time off.
Do you agree? Okay, good.
WPR's Mary-Kate McCoy brought us that story on Tilia, the conservation dog. Wisconsin Life is a co-production of Wisconsin Public Radio and PBS Wisconsin in partnership with Wisconsin Humanities. Additional support comes from Lowell and Mary Peterson of Appleton. Find more Wisconsin Life at wisconsinlife.org and on Facebook. I'm Maureen McCullum.
And now, ahead of Transgender Day of Remembrance, Saturday, we examine the prejudice, discrimination, and violence encountered by people who are transgender and non-binary. The Human Rights Campaign, it documents at least 46 transgender or gender nonconforming people fatally shot or killed this year. And they say this is surely underreported. Are you part of the transgender community? Do you live in a place that is welcoming and safe, or is it the opposite? Join in at 800-642-1234. Michael Munson is executive director of Forge. It's a transgender support and anti-violence organization. Michael, welcome to the Ideas Network.
Oh, thank you. I'm good. I'm glad to be here today with you.
There is this worrisome FBI data that you've seen showing that anti-transgender hate crimes are going up, and it's a big jump in instances from 2019 to 2020. What can you tell us about this violence that the transgender and the gender nonconforming community is facing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One of the things that we don't know is the FBI data. So FBI does not track trans people, but we definitely have seen an uptick in anti-trans violence, which includes, homicides as well as other forms of victimization. So it's a trend that's mirroring what's happening in general society, where there's an uptick in gun violence, an uptick in police brutality, an uptick in hate of all different kinds against all different people, and that includes trans people.
So this really gets swept up into a larger problem of hate that is going on in America?
I think so. I mean, there's certainly been anti-trans violence, which has been going on for forever. I mean, it's not a new thing, but I think the higher numbers this year, and they continue to grow, is likely added to by the general culture of hate that we see going on in our politics and in, kind of the celebrity life and some of the things that make mainstream press.
Black and brown transgender women and transgender people face additional discrimination, additional persecution. We've seen documentation that the majority of people targeted and killed were Black and Latinx transgender women last year. How do you think about that kind of statistic? How does it sit with you?
Well, it's very painful. And again, not to compare to general culture, but it's reflective of general culture, where Black and brown people are disproportionately affected by violence, which is really, horrific. And it's a really big challenge. This year, it looks like there are 65% of the trans deaths that are Black and 15% that are Latinx. So, I mean, clearly that is the majority are folks of color who died this past year.
How do you reach those communities and figure out what can be done? What can be done to stop the violence, especially in marginalized communities?
Right. And I think this is a challenge because, when I hear you say, like, what can we do to reach those communities, I think that places then the burden on trans communities to stop the violence. So we really need to flip that around and say, what does our culture need to do about anti-trans violence? So how do we reduce racism? How do we reduce sexism? How do we reduce all of the things that contribute to people having hateful feelings and prejudices against trans and non-binary people? So I think it's really about our culture, not about reaching out to trans people for trans people to stop the violence, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And looking at Wisconsin as a whole, the Human Rights Campaign puts out this state equality index, which is really interesting. It's like the state by state scorecard. In Wisconsin, it says we're building equality. How might you translate that work in progress type score?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. I think that there are some things that are already happening. The political realm does help. So having a governor that is more liberal is certainly helpful in stopping some of the anti-trans legislation. So legislative efforts are one piece of the component of the HRC's equality index. There are other things like, what are the school districts doing to stop bullying and hate? Are insurance companies covering trans-related healthcare? All of those kinds of things contribute to a healthier life for trans people and a healthier society that says we acknowledge and respect people who are maybe different than who we are. So it respects trans people, it respects people of color, it respects people of all ages, and all of those kind of different populations.
Michael, as you look at that policy shifts and the legislation, in June of last year, the Supreme Court ruled in Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia, that case that sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination are prohibited under federal employment protections.
Yeah.
Was that a turning point for the transgender community?
I think that it is. I mean, it for sure is. And I think that when we look at things, that doesn't always go into practice, right? So laws can be great, legislation can be great, Supreme Court can be great, but we're seeing things not to change from trans issues, but like reproductive rights were a given based on the Supreme Court, and now they're in question. So just because the Supreme Court ruled, and it was an excellent ruling, it doesn't mean that that is what's happening on the local level or the state level. So there are still like anti-trans bills going on in our state, in Wisconsin, even though they're not about employment. So yes, it helps a lot, but there are some other things that can override that or change it in non-employment settings.
Along those lines, more than 100 anti-trans bills have been introduced nationwide. Here in Wisconsin, the Assembly approved bills that would ban transgender students taking part in sports based on their gender identity. How do these bills affect the culture shift that you're addressing and working on?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, this was the highest year for anti-trans legislation across the country. So there's 194 anti-trans legislative efforts, and there are currently 4 that are present in Wisconsin that are still in the works. So I mean, having just the fact that there are anti-trans bills has a really big impact on trans people and trans youth. I mean, what is it like for, a 12-year-old kid who's been told, no, you can't play on the soccer team that aligns with your gender? I mean, that is a really horrible message to send kids. And then what do they grow up with? Thinking that they're not as good of a person, not as real of a person as their non-transgender peers. So it's really a horrible thing when we look at the bills that are against children in particular.
We have Michael Munson with us, leads a transgender support and anti-violence organization called Forge. How do you feel attitudes have changed toward the transgender community over the years? Have you noticed your own feelings and attitudes evolve? Are you worried about the health and safety of a transgender loved one? What do you think should be done to address anti-transgender violence? Still time to talk about this. 800-642-1234. Back in a minute with Michael Munson here on the Ideas Network. It's the morning show. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. During this Transgender Awareness Week, we're discussing the work of the Milwaukee advocacy organization called Forge. It focuses on improving the lives of transgender people by building stronger connections, by providing resources, and empowering growth by spreading information about what the HRC estimates as 2 million transgender and non-binary people in the U.S. Michael Munson co-founded Forge, leads the organization with us for about 9 more minutes. Let's bring on a caller now. Timmy is joining us from Fort Atkinson. Hi, Timmy. What would you like to bring up?
Just the fact that they're passing laws for these for transgender, and once you're on a program with the HRT, it changes your muscle tone and your body structure. So I don't think it's fair that they're disqualifying transgender people from doing sports or activities.
Timmy, could I ask you about what your situation has been like, your personal experience?
My personal experience is it's been a little rough with the family, but things have gotten better over the last year. I did take a road trip out to the West this summer to get away and kind of reflect and make sure this is the right path I took. But during that whole trip and all my stops, I had absolutely no problem. I identify as a transgender woman. Most people would say I don't pass really well, but I present myself as well as I can. And I think people respect that.
Michael, go ahead.
I think, the first part about sports, it's absolutely ridiculous that trans kids can't play in the sports that align with their gender. And, whether that's because of, what physical structures, people have when they're trans, on hormones, not on hormones. When we're looking at kids in particular, most kids are not on hormones, and, kids are kids, and it's pretty even playing field. So it's really much more about discrimination and hate than it is about the kids' bodies.
Timmy, if you're still there, at the holidays, what might that be like to see family again? And what are you thinking about during the holiday season?
The holiday season's a little rougher. Sorry, getting emotional. Because of my transitioning and my past, I ended up where I'm not really invited to the family affairs. I have to create my own now. So that's basically what I'm having to do now. Even though that I'm still good friends with my ex-wife, some of the kids feel that maybe we shouldn't be together all the time. So we should just create separate lives, which is really hard, but I'm working on that part.
Michael, what support and advice can you offer Timmy?
It's hard. I think that, we've got a really divided pool where some folks are experiencing kind of ostracization from their families. And on the other hand, a lot of families are becoming more accepting. So to me, I hope that you can find some good rituals and make some new plans for future holidays that feel good for you and the people that are around you, whether that's chosen family or friends.
Timmy, thank you for sharing your story. Michael, you were one of Forge's co-founders. How did you get into this work? How did you get into this advocacy work?
Well, 27 years ago, there was not a lot of internet presence, and we found that there were a group of folks that really wanted to access resources that just weren't there. So the work started very grassroots out of, there's a need here for people to connect with therapists, to connect with each other. And we started out as a small group of folks who needed support, and we wanted to help people get connected to those existing resources. We've since moved on to exclusively focusing on anti-transgender hate violence and sexual assault and intimate partner violence.
When you talk about support networks, do you also mean bringing people together so that they can talk and they have an outlet, especially if they're going through difficult times at home?
Yes, of course. It certainly means bringing people together. It means that we want to include the people who are supporters, whether they're their biological family, family of origin. We want to encourage those connections and increase community connections to, reduce stigma, reduce hate, and increase, a sense of belonging and community and love with each other.
We're talking with Michael Munson, who leads the anti-violence and transgender advocacy organization called Forge, as we discuss issues facing the transgender community and the greater society, especially in the pandemic. You can join in with your story, 800-642-1234. Michael, looking ahead to Trans Day of Remembrance and commemorating people who have died in violent ways, what are groups doing to commemorate the day?
There are a couple of things. So on the day of, which is November 20th, we've got a couple of things going on that are kind of statewide. In Madison, there's going to be a rally and march and set of speeches from 3 to 5 p.m. on that Saturday at the Capitol. So people are going to meet at the Capitol. The day before that, in Milwaukee, we're hosting a virtual Milwaukee Transgender Day of Remembrance on Zoom and Facebook. So we encourage folks to join us if you'd like to learn more about that event. You can find it at forge-wi.org. And we have a lineup of all Black and Latinx speakers. And I believe that the Saturday program is all Black and Latinx speakers as well. So we encourage folks to come to either of those events. And we know that, a lot of times churches or other smaller community groups hold other TDORs that are maybe of a little bit lesser scale.
In the last moments we have, let's turn to the pandemic, because there is new survey data out indicating that LGBTQ plus people are far more likely to have received a COVID vaccine than the general population and are more worried about the effects of the Delta variant. What are some of your observations so far as to how the pandemic has affected the transgender community?
That's really interesting what you just shared, because in our experience with trans communities in particular, there's been a lower level of vaccination. So, that's really interesting that you report the opposite of that. One of the things that we're seeing in terms of COVID is just this devastation around, racism and economic insecurity and all of the things that are affecting everyone related to COVID. And we're also seeing an increase in intimate partner violence, and that directly relates to the murders of trans folks, where there's a higher percentage of folks that are dying as a result of intimate partner violence. So COVID has really increased the levels of intimate partner violence and created a lot more isolation for folks, which can sometimes increase risk-taking and increase depression and increase suicidal thoughts and actions.
And the Human Rights Campaign said, with that caveat, LGBTQ people getting vaccinated, there is this counter story that people who are living at the intersections of multiple marginalized identities bear the brunt of this pandemic. Would you make that assessment?
I think so. I mean, when we look at the fact that, a lot of Black and brown folks are not getting vaccinated for a variety of reasons that, we could take hours to talk about. And there are other health disparities for trans communities and for Black and brown trans communities, and a lack of access to good health care. It definitely means that there's a disproportionate effect of folks who are experiencing COVID-related illness and some of the hardships related to COVID.
Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Michael Munson leads the anti-violence and transgender advocacy organization called Forge. We have a link to Forge at wpr.org/mornings. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. This is The Morning Show, and you're listening to the Ideas Network.
The UW